Hey guys, welcome back to Coffee and Questions. I'm so glad that you could join us here today at the Pleasant Hill Cafe and just join me for a time of just hanging out and having some coffee and trying to answer some questions that you might have about life and the Bible and Christianity, and more about Christianity than other things. But and remember, we're interested in your questions. What are you wondering about? What do you want to know? What is it that you want the answers to? You can let me know, and I'd love to answer this for you and talk with you about it. Today I was thinking about, and it actually started last week. Last week I did a little video on the Pilgrims and the Puritans. What did they believe that drove them to come to the United States anyways? What led that to happen? And so I thought today I would do another one that has a little bit of a connection with Thanksgiving. And so I was thinking about the 7 deadly sins, and of course there's one on there, gluttony, which seems to maybe apply to Thanksgiving. And so I thought, let's ask this question: what are the 7 deadly sins, and what is it with gluttony? Is gluttony really a sin? Is that something that the Bible really says is a deadly sin? And so what does that even mean? And so I thought we got to start with some information about the 7 deadly sins. Now the 7 deadly sins actually originate way back in the 400 ADs, 450, something around those times. There was a desert father. The desert fathers were a bunch of ascetic monks that lived surprisingly in the desert, and just very hermits. Some of the first monk orders were actually created out in the deserts as part of the desert order, and somewhat mystical, kind of interesting guys. Anyways, the 7 deadly sins comes from a desert father named Evagrius. And I think that's his name. And he put together a list of actually 8 of vices that he thought led to other sins, led to, if these things were true in your life, then that created more sins. And so these were things for you to be watching out for. Now, one of his disciples was John Cassian, who was also a desert father. One of the desert fathers. He was connected with both the East and the West when it came to the Catholic Church, so the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic, the Roman Catholic Church. He's connected with both of them, and in his writings, he ended up bringing this list of 8, 8 sins, 8 vices, 8 whatevers, and introduces them into Europe, and it happens about 590 AD. A pope by the name of Gregory the Great. That's right, Gregory the Great. He actually took those 8 capital sins, those 8 deadly sins. They weren't called that at this point, and actually revised the list down to 7 and made that officially a part of the 7 deadly sins. And so the list of the 7 deadly sins that Pope Gregory came up with or finished was pride, covetousness, lust, envy, gluttony, anger, and sloth. Now, Evagrius included actually sorrow or dejection, and the sloth had very much the idea of apathy as well. And so those are the 7 deadly sins, and just a very quick history about how they came about and where they came from. Now, these 7 deadly sins aren't like those sins like when you make a mistake, like a one-time boom, I made this mistake, and that's a sin. And like, for example, it's not like a murder. It's not like when you just go out and you murder someone and that was a sin. No, things like pride and gluttony and anger have much more to do with a lifestyle that you're living, an attitude that you're holding on to. Envy and things like that. So, the murder may be one sin that happens in a moment, but maybe it was actually brought about because of a lifestyle or an attitude of anger or pride or envy. And so that's what the 7 deadly sins were about. In fact, originally when Evagrius wrote about them, it was more about a diagnostic in your own life to say, hey, if you've got these things in your life, it's a good possibility that you're not living the life that God has called you to. It wasn't necessarily, hey, these are the 7 deadly sins. So the one we're most interested in, of course, is gluttony, because Thanksgiving's on Thursday, so why wouldn't we want to know about gluttony and if that's a sin or not? And so we got to remember that gluttony also was not considered just like this one-time thing that, whoa, man, if you eat too much once, that's a problem. In fact, it's not even about overeating necessarily. And it has nothing to do with weight. It's not about anything about like being overweight or anything like that. Gluttony has to do with a lifestyle choice, a way of living. There was an author. I was reading a little portion of his book dealing with this. It's Steve DeNeff is his name, and I got a quote from him. He says, "Gluttons may be thin and fit and eat only small portions, but what all gluttons have in common is an immoderate attention to or desire for food, a continual urge to indulge oneself beyond the point of their need or limit." Right? So the idea isn't about some simple consumption of food, but what the role of food is really taking in your life. Now you got to remember when Evagrius was writing this original list of 8, he was living in a monastic order in the middle of a desert, and food was very slim and it was very well regulated out. And when he was writing about gluttony, you know what his initial talk was about? This idea of gluttony was a sin if you're distracted from doing your afternoon prayers and activities because you're thinking too much about supper that's coming. And so it's not about how much food you've consumed in one sitting or even in your lifetime. It's about what role does food take in your life? Is it taking on too large of a role? Is it becoming too important for you? Is it taking on almost the role of an idol, you might say? And that's where I begin to take issue with gluttony as a deadly sin, because you cannot find this in the Bible. I mean, please tell me, please point to me. If you know, please show me a verse or a passage in the Bible that tells me that gluttony is a sin. All right, we can look at how Christians have a spirit of self-control and all those sorts of things, but that doesn't say gluttony itself is a sin. The only thing that I came across that they tried to use to support this was DeNeff himself, is some really weird argument about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden eating of the forbidden fruit, and that was a sin of gluttony. And what? That's not what that was about at all. Like, that's a complete misunderstanding of the Bible. And so I didn't find any evidence of gluttony in the Bible. Now, don't get me wrong, gluttony's in the Bible. The writer of Proverbs, Solomon, and some of the other proverb writers that he collected from talk about the dangers of gluttony. And that it's not wise to be a glutton and we should avoid it. But there is nothing in there that talks about it being a sin. The problem I find is that they've oversimplified it. All right? The real issue isn't the food. The real issue is idolatry. The real issue is saying you've allowed food to become an idol for you. And the warnings against idolatry are all over the Bible. I mean, we don't have to go far for that. Anytime that anything takes place as being more important to you than God is, and that is your idol. And if that's food, then I guess you can call it gluttony. But I'm sorry, there's nothing in the Bible that really talks about this. In fact, on the other hand, if you're thinking about feasts like Thanksgiving, God ordained a whole bunch of feasts for His people in the Old Testament. So there are all these feasts: Feast of Unleavened Bread, Feast of the Tabernacles of the Booths. I mean, just feast after feast after feast. And Jesus Himself attends feasts. So eating food on Thanksgiving and enjoying food on Thanksgiving is not a sin. It's not a problem at all. The problem comes if the other 364 days out of the year, and on Thanksgiving, I guess, too, you're thinking more about food and you're more concerned about your food than you are with God and what God would have in your life, then possibly food is taking on a wrong role. It's possibly becoming an idol, and maybe it needs to be something that you deal with. And so those are my thoughts on the sin of gluttony. If you want to maybe correct me if you feel differently on it, or have other thoughts, I'd love to continue this conversation. Like I said, it's not that gluttony isn't in the Bible. I just don't see it spelled out as a sin. What I see is that idolatry is. Well, thanks for talking. I'm glad you could join me today, and I hope to see you again next week. Thanks, guys.